Now, the last time when we did our test for errors, we did it this way, by simply putting in a line that redirected us if there were any errors. But now we're doing single page submission, so we actually want to handle it differently. Let's instead say if it is empty, then we're going to perform the update. And I'm going to use this comment just as a placeholder. So, of course, all of this can now move up into that block because now we're ready to go to perform the update. This, incidentally, just so we don't forget, is the end of the if is set post right up here. I'm just going to copy that down here. This is often helpful to put a note like this, and that's going to be the end of that. So that way we won't get confused what our brackets are about. So if errors are empty, then do one thing, else, and this will be errors occurred. That'll just remind us that we need to come back and deal with that a little later. Now, in order to perform our update, we need to write our SQL query. And we know how to do that. For the update command, the format was update subjects set. And I'm going to go ahead and put it all in the same update command. Menu name equals, and then in quotes, I'll do in-place substitution for menu name. Then we'll put a comma, drop down to the next line, position equals, and we don't need quotes around this. We can just do position and then comma, and last of all, visible. And we won't need quotes around that. We'll put in visible. And then that covers all of the values that we're going to update, but we need to tell it what to update. We have to give it a reference, and we'll do that with the ID, where ID equals, and then we'll put in our ID that we pulled down and sanitized. Now we've got our update statement. We need to execute it. We execute it the same way we've been doing with result equals MySQL query, and then our query and the connection. And we're familiar with that by now. But the way that we test to see if an update succeeded or not is going to be a little bit different than what we've been working on. So we're going to do if, and then we're going to do a new MySQL command. MySQL affected rows, parentheses, equals 1. Now you can guess what that's going to do. It's going to tell us how many rows were affected by the update. And MySQL affected rows will always apply to whatever the most recent query was over this connection. So it doesn't matter what other users are doing across their connections. This page on its connection, what was the most recent query, what rows were affected. And if the answer is 1, then we know it was successful. And if not, then we know it failed. Now, even though we haven't written in results for what should happen in case there are errors, if it succeeds, then it'll just drop on through. Success won't do anything. It'll just drop on through and then output the form. So let's go ahead and try that and see what happens when we do it. Go back to Firefox and let's reload our page here. We'll click on Edit Subject, About Widget Corp, and let's just take out a letter there. We'll just make it with no P. We'll say Edit Subject. Now it came back and it appeared there. Let's reload the page. Oh, let's not do it that way. Let's click on it here. Now notice here, in fact, it was already gone. What's happening here? Look back over here and notice that we actually pulled that information from the database way up here. We found the selected page before the update occurred. And we didn't need to do that. We had all the form data submitted to us that we needed. So this can actually move. I'm going to pull it out, drop it down here, right above the header. And now, if a form comes into us, it'll be processed, submitted to the database, and then Find Selected Page will pull it back out of the database to display. And we'll get a fresh, updated copy of it. Instead, before we were getting a stale copy of it to work with. So let's try that again. So now let's get a fresh one here. Let's look at products, and I'll take the S off the end of it. I'll click Edit Subject, and you'll see that it gave me a fresh version. I'll go back to try Widget Corp. We'll put the P back on the end, There we go. So I get a fresh version, and it did succeed. So now that we know that the subject name will change, let's go ahead and make sure we've got the position and the visibility working as well, and make sure that those updates work. Now, of course, position isn't going to update the position of any other subjects, just this one. But I'll hit Edit Subject, and it didn't work. It went back to position 1 and visible yes. That indicates that the form submission didn't happen, which must mean we had some errors. Let's switch back and see if we can figure out what that error was. Go up and look at our form validation. I've spotted the error, but I happen to already know what it is. See if you can find it. The problem is that our visible is a set of radio buttons, and it's submitting a value of either 0 or 1. Now, if it submits a value of 1, that's no problem. Our form will handle that fine. But when it submits a value of 0, when we try to see if it's a required field, we test it to see whether it's set, which it is, and we see whether or not it's empty. But empty is overreaching. Empty actually considers 0 to be empty. Therefore, we have a few choices. We can either not make visible a required field, or we can use some other kind of test besides empty, or we can tell empty not to overreach. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to put in another condition here and say, and I'll take the same post field name, and if that is not equal to 0, so now that's an additional condition. I'll group it with empty. I'm just selecting from empty to 0, and I'll surround it with parentheses. So now this is all one condition, and this is one condition. So if either this is true or this and this is true. See how we did that? So we grouped together a Boolean expression. We have two things that are being tested here, and the results of that are part of an OR statement with this. So if it's empty but also not 0. So let's save that, switch back over. Let's reload our page. I'll just click off of it and back onto it to make sure we get a fresh copy. I'm going to put in a P so we'll know if that changes or not. We'll make position 2 and visible no, edit subject. And there it worked. So now we've fixed that problem, we've improved our code, and that's the kind of incremental testing that you'll want to make sure you're doing as you go through your site. Go ahead and try out all of the fields, try out all of the buttons, make sure that everything works the way you expect before you get too much further down the road. Now, it took a fair amount of perception on our part to figure out whether the update actually occurred, and it occurs to me that it would be a lot better if our application gave us some feedback telling us that it occurred. And we talked about that a little bit when we were talking about the double-page submission. Well, now that we're doing single-page submission, it's easier than ever for us to do. Instead of having a redirect on success or failure or on errors occurring, instead, we can use some simple messaging techniques that will allow us to set values of messages in the form processing that then will be available to us when we get down to the form. It'll be like passing messages from the validation down to the form in the bottom. And we'll see that in the next movie.